Go over some of the financial incentives that are across the state of Iowa and kind of review some of those at the federal level and kind of how they got to be where they're at. But start off with, once again, I'm from IEA. Clean Cities Coalitions are basically partnerships throughout. We have like 80 Clean Cities Coalitions across the US. We're like the very front people that find out about Department of Energy funding. Points of contact for people interested in transitioning to alternative fuels. We are very proud of all of our fuels across the state of Iowa. And here today, I'm talking about electric, so we're going to focus on that. But if you want to advance. So once again, we're going back to the AFDC. The one that she was on earlier, and I think was dropped in the chat, was some of the locate stations, but now we're on this side of the tab that says laws and incentives. If you want to find out more about these key different types of legislation across the state or across the federal government, and then see some pretty good utility examples, this is your place to be. There's also information about the different fuels and vehicles, best practices, and then, yeah, go on from there. Kind of revisit the clean vehicle credit. It's evolved since 2009, and that started with that plug-in electric vehicle and electric vehicle criteria with that cap at 200,000 sales per manufacturer. Now Tesla and Chevy Bolt both ran out of that. So August 17th, 2022, it was kind of re-upped through ERA, Inflation Reduction Act, and it still had plug-in electric vehicles and electric vehicles, and kept the 200,000 sales, but required the final assembly in North America. So that's your Build America, Buy America Act. We'll go over that in a minute. But come January 1st, 2023, this was also in the Inflation Reduction Act. It takes away that 200,000 sales per manufacturer requirement, which is fantastic. It also takes away the plug-in hybrid vehicle, but adds fuel cell electric vehicle. Whole different conversation if we get into fuel cells, that's more or hydrogen. But now you have to have a certain income requirement. There's an MSRP limit, which cuts out your F-150 Lightning typically. There's also critical mineral and battery component requirements that got picked up as well. It became a bifurcated, aka two different levels, one for about 3,000, another for about 3,000. And it just increases the amount of materials needed to be produced in the US. Also beginning January 1st, 2023, used electric vehicles can become eligible for a credit of $4,000. So that's exciting. We're finally seeing some vehicles turn over from the first batch and go into the next one. There's also this alternative fuel infrastructure tax credit, and this isn't only for electric vehicles, this kind of goes beyond that, but it is applicable for residential, it's up to $1,000, and for commercial, it's up to $100,000. This tax credit of 30%, but without permitting or inspection fees, and it has to fit certain requirements of poverty level, census tract, median family income, and apprenticeship and prevailing wage requirements. And that starts January 1st. And there's a lot more information to come on that. There's the IRS website is kind of where I try to go for that. There is the Clean School Bus. Yeah. Is it being funky? Oh yeah, maybe. Being elegant. This Clean School Bus rebate and grant program. This is through the EPA. I contracted 204 of our local school districts this past, before August. Yeah, I had to do that before August of this year. And we had this very wonderful amount of funding, $375,000 for electric school buses that are class 7 or above. If you're in this priority school districts, I contacted all of our priority school districts in Iowa. Got some really good responses. We definitely had people apply for one or more. And you also get this infrastructure funding per school bus, which is also cool. So say you have 5, then you get $100,000 for this infrastructure. Is that going to go everywhere or all the way? Probably not. But does it help? Absolutely. It helps with the replacement, so you do have to scrap a bus. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is that there is a grant program coming out soon, and they're actually asking for comments and considerations from our city personnel, IPTA, so Iowa People Transportation Association, state government, and this grant program will be able to apply to all of you. So our local governments, well, not all, because we have like Clark here, but state or local governments can go and get some of this funding and give it out to our schools as well. This allows a pretty interesting ability to really foster this, create this adoption across our state.
Is that a mission? So you can kind of double up, like the district gets some, the city gets some, you put it together?
Yes, yeah, and it's unique because with the rebate program, at least it was 375, but you didn't have to spend that up front, so it was kind of a rebate. And then that's coming for the next 5 years too. They actually found that it was so effective at getting people to apply that they increased the funding by an extra like 30% versus where they were. And it was like $5 million. So it's pretty impressive. Now we're going to move on to the NEVI program. This is National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure. So you start at the top and you see that there's this overarching NEVI, but then it breaks down into the NEVI formula program, which is $5 billion over 5 years. And then the NEVI grant program, which is $2.5 billion. The NEVI formula program funnels down to our state DOTs, but the corridor charging grant program and community charging grant program actually comes from state and local governments and MPOs and other people that are going to be on the next slide. But these all have to fit into this Build America, Buy America Act, which adds on to the American steel and iron, but now it's also the construction materials. But there are 3 different types of waivers available. There's comments being taken on it right now, I think. And it's always evolving. But there's a public interest, non-availability, and unreasonable cost. So that's just a good thing to keep in the back of your head if you're going to go for these types of funding opportunities. There's also ADA, which requires the accessibility, of course, unobstructed access, and your charging spaces have to be a little bit larger. And you go into these disadvantaged communities. We have a Justice 40 initiative, Argonne National Lab, based out of Illinois. They put out a tool that identifies all of our disadvantaged communities across the US, and 40% of our infrastructure funding has to go there for climate and clean energy distribution. Good thing is that there are quite a few that fall along our corridors, and I believe kind of characteristics of how we're going about NEVI is like within a mile, so that you can actually make a good use case saying, yeah, it's helping these disadvantaged communities. There's more guidance to come on that. The next we'll kind of take a look at the very top level. As I said, these metropolitan planning organizations, local governments, and state or political subdivisions of the state can go in and get these grant programs. This is the most applicable to you guys. You can get the charger, installation, and operation for the first 5 years, as well as traffic control devices, which is pretty interesting. This is all of the guidance we have at this time. We're expected to get more by the end of the year, which is only 2 months away, 2.5, 3. But the corridor charging is along designated alternative fuel corridors. Those are I-80, I-35, I-29, and I-380 in Iowa. And then our community charging has pretty much just little pockets wherever it's found most useful. Creating plans, having a planning group could potentially set you apart. You're good. So this formula program, there are going to be 4 DC fast chargers, 150 kilowatt, installed every 50 miles within 1 mile of the alternative fuel corridors. Once again, those are on screen: I-29, I-35, I-80, and I-15. Obviously, we're talking about $51.4 million to the DOT over the next 5 years. This is still in huge development. We don't have a grant program out yet. The Energy Office works really closely with Iowa DOT on this. So I put the iowodot.gov/Iowa EV plan. That's the website that has our first plan that we submitted August 1st and got it approved a week ago. But we have so far done some small and large group stakeholder meetings, including with our utilities, with 200-ish people for our large stakeholder group meeting. We've talked to electricians across the state of Iowa. We'd be happy to talk to any of you folks. I've got my email on the slide here, and I can definitely get you on that list to be in that conversation, be invited to all the events. You should sign up on here to get the notifications about different webinars that we're planning on having. But we also had a public EV survey. Some of you may have seen it, maybe not. But we had quite a few responses, 1,300, and then 700 public comments. So we had a "what would you like to add" thing at the end, and 30% of those responses were positive, 45% were neutral, usually just giving us something to think about, and then 25% were negative, like, why are you spending this money? So you can see on the side, we have some comment themes. People had a lot of ideas of where to put locations. One common misconception is that we cannot put these at rest stops because that is DOT land. Like, there's like a non-competition thing. It can't go at rest stops, but it can go anywhere else, pretty much. It has to be within 1 mile. Power needs, looking at the grid, affordability, cost. I must say that we are expecting it'll be about $1 million per location. This program funds up to 80% of the cost. So there's pretty good amount of funding coming to a lot of these communities. I know that a lot of places are very, very excited. You go to the next slide, I'll show you. This is what the basic graph, or one of the graphics that was in the Iowa EV plan, 130 pages long. These things there are 2 gaps along I-80 and then 2 gaps along I-35. Is it catching up with me? Yeah. Of course, we have these as well. You guys are here. We have a walkie come and go, that's NEVI compliant. It's got 4 DC fast chargers, 150 kilowatt within 1 mile. So 50 miles, you know, about that long, you know. We're landing somewhere in here that we might need to see another one. Here's a full-on gap though. That's where we're really gonna start focusing the money. And then later, we will come back and put in more infrastructure in other places with the extra. The first thing that we want to do is make sure that as people travel along our state, that they don't get stranded and they have reliable places to charge. There are so many different rules and regulations that are coming out right now from Federal Highway Administration, American Disabilities Act. Everyone is giving their input, putting rules on this. It's very up and coming per se, but you can also see, we talked a little bit about Volkswagen, although the screen wasn't up. This round, we had one here and here, as well as here and here. We don't know what those are gonna look like yet. We don't know if there's gonna be 4, 2, 1. So those are just proposed, we're taking them into consideration. All of the red dots are upgradable sites that we could upgrade or potentially partner with. There's a lot to be determined, and tomorrow I'm meeting with you. So we're working on it. As with everything that's coming down, we're constantly moving. If you want to go to the next slide, another one of Iowa DOT's grant programs is the Diesel Emission Reduction Act. It is basically reducing the amount of diesel pollutants going into the air. It can be anywhere from a full vehicle replacement to low rolling tires. And the amount of funding varies. The last applications were just due in September, so we're a little late, but it'll come around again. And to finish up with other ideas, there are so many local rebates. Yeah. There you go. These are all of our wonderful utilities that have rebates across the state that I've found so far. I have a whole spreadsheet. This is what I do in my time. Make compilations of all different funding activities. There's funding possibilities in my office. There's a loan program. There's each of these have either some type of EV readiness. So $100 to put in as you're building a site to get a plug ready. Can go up to $1,000, $5,000 for level 2, level 3. Pretty well spread apart. I made the dark green into things that I thought may be more applicable to you guys. But if I missed anything, I'm sorry. I tried. There's like 55. You know, this is somewhat of a new revelation, but we're consistently getting more and more rebates across the state, and we'll continue to look for more funding opportunities as well.
It looks like a lot of these are lining up with either like a climate or sustainability plan. Is that where a lot of these, like I'm thinking Pella, you know, the Iowa City, like that kind of eastern Iowa corridor. Is that where we're finding that a lot of cities are, you know, plugging in to these kind of programs, or are they doing it outside of those efforts and doing it separately? I'm just trying to think of that kind of piece through.
Yeah, so I know City of Iowa City got a lot of inspiration from the Eastern Iowa EV Readiness Plan. That's where they really started figuring out how important it was to have these types of incentives. We do have our EV registration fee, and we're going to start having a public charging fee. That's TBD. Iowa DOT decided that, you know, that's in July of 2023. So that's 0.026 per kilowatt hour for all public chargers across the state. Unfortunately, that's not my doing. It's already passed the legislature. Nothing I can really do about it. But there's different ideas on how to implement it. It's going through the tax professionals right now. They're thinking that the way that they're gonna do it is, say you had this New Year's 170 kilowatt hours. Okay, so you plug that into the calculator and it spits out a number of how much money you have to pay. You don't really have to, they don't have the time to see you justify it. So that's all to be determined, more information coming. And I'd be happy to connect you with the right people if you want to talk about that. But
Just to clarify, the cost there would be to the entity that owns the public charging facility.
yes. Yep, they will be the owner. And it's only public, so if you're doing it for your own fleets, they don't care. It's more to catch the money from pass by, like pass throughs, so your interstate travelers. Yeah.
What's the plan of that?
It's to, once again, it's like a supplemental thing onto the $130 of electric vehicle. And then it's that's for when you're charging at home, or you're charging at your workplace. And then when you get into the public realm, you're catching, say if someone from Illinois is coming to Iowa, they're still using our roads and they would still be charged our gasoline tax. So that's the way that they're trying to recoup that.
So BMT ever happened, they would probably get rid of that then?
I don't think we're moving in that direction. Yeah, there's a lot of different things happening since there really isn't a consideration at this time for like vehicle miles traveled. May in the future, and maybe that's something that DOT would be happy to talk about, or IDLES, Iowa Department of Land and Agricultural Stewardship. They do some of that tax research as well. And to speak about some of our second life battery stuff, because I know there was a question about that earlier. Argonne National Lab has some really good resources about just because it reaches the end of battery life for transportation doesn't necessarily mean it can't be used as a backup generator. It can be used for, say you want to like have it do, what else is there? Maybe you can also recycle them. There's also Iowa DNR is doing some work on recycling that. But there's a cool project going on in Cedar Rapids that they're using 8 batteries. They're new in this case, but they're using them to help reduce the grid impact. So it's pulling a consistent amount, a low amount of electricity from the grid, and it's storing it in these batteries so that it can still give a fast charge. So it can still have an output of 150 or 120 kilowatt, but it's only pulling, 5 at any time. So, maybe using it in something like that could be as well. Solar storage. Spitballing, yes.
On the tax you talked about, is that you pay how many kilowatt hours used? Is that gonna, our public entities gonna be required to pay that as well, do you know?
I believe it's everyone. Yeah. But yeah, I would recommend talking to the Iowa Tax Department on the enforcement, yeah. Which there was.
Have you heard, so these are kind of like cost share programs, right? And the Metro is quite used to some cost share programs, but historically we have some that they've used up really quickly, some that kind of just sit there for a really long time and need a little bit of. Have you heard how these are they flying off the shelves and they need a little bit more massaging, you know, trying to think for that.
Mid-American Energy and Alliant Energy, they have seen huge uses of this funding. They are also part of that National Electric Highway Coalition, so they're putting in their own chargers across the state. At least I know Mid-American is. But some of these smaller ones, our associations, so Iowa Rural Electric Cooperative Association and Iowa Municipal Association, IAMU, Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities, there we go. They both are huge into this. They're like, if you want me there, tell me. Like they're really wanting to be in this conversation. They're very excited. There's of course worries about everything else that you could possibly think of, labor shortages, grid, but the way we're looking at it now, we're not too worried about it until say there were like a crazy increase. It's something that you need to talk to your utility early and often about. They will be great resources. The larger utilities such as Mid-American and Alliant, they are on top of this. They have their own staffing that goes out and they spread the education about this. Ames also does really fantastic at this. I don't know about the rest. That's only because I haven't been here more than 5 months, so.
So, and well, people in the room can't see the chat. We do have Madame on the call, Patrick Tudor is here with us. And she did, she said, willing to connect and things like that. And then she put in a link to the electric vehicle program at Mid-American Energy. So I'll include that in the follow-up email as well. But yeah, Madame is at the table for a lot of this stuff. They're well aware these things are coming down the pipeline. So
Yep, they're fantastic to talk to. Are there any other questions? I'd be happy to keep you guys up to date with different funding opportunities because of course, going electric is more expensive to start off with. There's always going to be that startup price, so the more incentives that I can give and not necessarily me, but I can spread the word about, the better.
Back to the question about the formula dollars that are coming to the state, and lots still to be determined, but pairing that up with the DOT's regional multi-year plans, for when they know certain parts of the interstate system are already going to be touched. Has there been any talk about pairing those up so that as long as you're disrupting one, at that same time, you may as well go ahead and do this other thing?
There have been conversations about that. Don't know exactly, but there's been conversation about, it's gonna take probably 3 of 5 years to get the charging out to the first part of the interstates. And then the last 2 years can be spent spending the extra money on level 2 and level 3 chargers, depending on what comes out to the rules. But yes, there has been discussion, and I think the approach that DOT kind of settled on very broadly is to say, everyone, we're not going to choose one entity to do everything. We want to share the love. We want to share this money. We want it to come from opinions of the community. We don't want to just put them places that they won't get used. I will say that the more hi, doggy. The more information and more community stakeholders that you have. Oh my gosh. The more stakeholders and people that would be willing to use the chargers, the better.
Yeah, there's an important storytelling component component in all of this as well. They've got to be in places that are normalizing the technology because people see it and they see people using it as well.
Yes.
So I'll just one Clyde here for a second, one of our friends in Irvingdale, because we're gonna be doing that Hickman interchange in US 6.
Yeah, yeah.
And the interstate, and that might be an interesting place to think about. Some of this, even though it's not one of the gaps currently identified, and there's some existing infrastructure.
And I mean, I would say go for the 2.5 billion too.
Right.
So that community charging piece or the corridor charging piece for that matter. They're having many different discussions across EPA and the right entities, but they're trying to figure out the best way to get that money out. Whether it's, I don't know if the state really wants to go for the whole thing. So I would recommend you guys really taking the lead on that and say, if you really want charters for your community, there's $2.5 billion sitting there. Wait,
Related to that, you said that some traffic control, right, so I assume these are things like adaptive traffic systems that can move vehicles, no matter what type of vehicle, more efficiently through a space.
yes, and there is actually consideration being done for heavy duty as well. You'll see that in the DOT plan if you decide to dive into 130 pages, but they lay out two different ways to get chargers, whether it's a pull-through method, which would help with your truck and trailer, or your typical drive-up. So, you know, there's many different avenues to go about getting this infrastructure into your community. And talking to your school districts, I mean, talking to different, if you can pull in like I mean, I don't know how many of us here are along disadvantaged communities off the top of my head, that's taken into consideration, but if you can get your community on board, that's good. We're also looking for information there.
Yeah, and I'll give a little bit of context from, you know, the MPO side. So one of the things that we've done the last year is working on greenhouse gas inventories for each of the metro communities. And part of that is dialing in on vehicle laps traveled and those transportation greenhouse emissions. And I was sitting in on the Des Moines Climate Action Plan meeting last week, and you can see that as we go along with it, they have about 11 years of data, and you can see that mid-am is on its way down, and that natural gas and energy emissions are on their way down, but that transportation one is going to be one of the biggest pieces for this whole metropolitan region to really hone in on this. So single occupancy vehicle pieces, and so something that we've been looking at the MPO is, one, I'm preparing specific transportation inventory for the metro, and then we hope to be able to break down the data by corridor. So then when we go in and say, okay, we are doing either community or corridor grant, we have that data straight away. And so one of the things that I've been hearing a lot from folks around the metro and the state is, you know, this first year is going to be a big grab for a lot of the coasts who already have a bunch of these planning pieces and or policies and things like that in place. And so my goal through this and through some of the work I've been doing already and with the help of our staff here is to prepare us for that second year and the third year. So we can jump in and say, okay, City of Clive, Bondurant, Norwalk, here are those corridors where we could have the biggest impact on, say, either VMT reductions or greenhouse gas emissions or increasing, you know, some of these pieces. And so let's focus in on those. It is going to be more of a dialing in for us because we really do look at the broad strokes kind of pieces around here. But it is something that we're trying to kind of hone in on and get that granular pieces on, work out how we could set together a methodology that could be continued on based on the data that we have, because we do extrapolate through the BMT data. It's, you know, the DOT, it's within the ground, so we don't necessarily know beyond axles what the quality is of a vehicle, things like that are. So there are estimations in there, but we're really trying to kind of get ahead of this curve and say, these are the grant programs that are coming out. It's not likely that most of us are ready now. Let's not grant. Let's get prepared for next year's submission and the year after that, and then figuring out those pieces. And I would also say, we have the service transportation block grant dollars that come through our office and that go out into the metropolitan area. And that is one of the best ways that we can start to prioritize and filter in those pieces. And Federal Highway did put out, it was a year or two ago, and I bet they're gonna update it now that all these bills have passed, but where, say, SCDG dollars can be spent within the EV space, planning, or is it actual infrastructure or installation? And so we have that on our website for people to look at, and it goes through each of the programs. So there's the Nationals, Highway Safety. I'm not the funding person, so there's a whole laundry list of the acronyms that you can look at and see, okay, these are those places. One of the other pieces that we're not really utilizing that well is ICAP. So our Iowa Clean Air Attainment Program right now is very much for kind of that idle reduction more than anything else. So we're actually speeding people through faster. So we're not really bringing down emission, making cleaner air. We're just idling less. And so we're really looking at how we as an organization and how communities around the metro are putting together projects, are funding these projects and things like that, and coupling things together is something that we're trying to strategically look at here. And I know where Dylan has been kind of putting up the net for all these programs that are coming out. And so we're doing our best with our small staff to really hone in on those and see, okay, what are the biggest pieces? What do we need to get prepared? And so some of those pieces are the greenhouse gas inventories, those transportation sector things. So straight away you can have data saying, this is where we're at now. These are the metrics that we are trying to get to. And something that I was just looking at is what the ICAP application process at the state level looks like. And Iowa DOT, because one of the things we're considering is, okay, do we want to include greenhouse gas reductions in, say, a funding program? And can our cities and communities and staff, do they have the technology or the data to say, this is what our reduction would be? And so through the ICAP process, there is a formula to do those. And so we're kind of trying to dig in, how do we figure out these smaller pieces and then work that into the regional scale? Because a lot of the money that rolls from us into the communities is very much broad strokes today. We're missing the marks at this point. So how do we kind of rectify that and bring it back to a level where we actually are incorporating or reducing greenhouse gas or reducing single occupancy vehicles or VMT or increasing, DART capacity or service level and things like that. So there's a lot of push and pull, and I think that's why we're giving you kind of this broader overview of funding, because when we dig down into it, a lot of stuff has to come from within the MPO. How do we prioritize these things within our own funding mechanisms? And is that a priority? And if so, how do we start scoring or making better projects, doing X, Y, Z? So there's a lot of moving pieces underneath that funding piece, and a lot of things that we could really honestly do better at. And so how do we kind of right that ship? So we would obviously always, from the MPO level, take input on the funding processes or how we can help enable better projects and things like that, because scoring and our funding processes are not perfect by any means, especially now that we have these federal priorities that may or may not be local priorities or metropolitan priorities at the table now too. So just wanted to toss that in there that we're really trying to figure out how we can be of most service and set up our our standard operating procedures to make sure that as these corridor or community and things like that, those grant funding programs come along, we already have you at least primed to have the data or capabilities and assistance needed. Not perfect, but so that's my 2 cents.
Yes, I keep my spreadsheet updated and I try to send it to Allison over here.
Mentioned that there are things with the dollars that have been set aside through the state's amendment plan. I think this would come from your department in particular. Dollars to help as eligible entities create their plans. Preparedness, is that correct?
For NEVI program funding, no. There isn't specific funding for creation of a plan. There's funding to help certain, pump up the like education side. And I haven't gone really deep into the weeds, but I did read the entire plan and it doesn't mention anything about helping communities create EV readiness. There are potential ways, I know Eastern Iowa EV readiness plan was created by the state regional commission. And that's how they meet on a quarterly basis and we give updates. And yeah, that would be something of interest that could be something we can talk about.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about our competitiveness going after these dollars, especially if we're stepping into national.
So in the surface transportation block grant, which is the mainstay of the MPO, could be used for EV training.
It's just such a heavily subscribed pot of money. It's difficult to go and argue that that type of priority would be bigger than some of the more traditional types of applications that are already programmed out by communities for multiple years. So if we understand that that's a tight space to try and get into now, is there some other space that will, is on the horizon that, or could be created where we could be able to access some dollars to help communities sort of accelerate into this space? That would be, if you're, or there's still some money that's yet to be programmed, that'd be nice to be able to go and compete for those dollars.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like how to couple different grants at this point, because FEMA has, say, the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities Grant, right? You could say that our electrical grid and our transportation system are a high priority in protecting and mitigating hazards too. I think part of this is, I think with EVs especially, and with transportation in general, it's right now siloed into, oh, here's the pot that it's in, but I think that it could be worked into, say, hazard mitigation, it could be worked into comprehensive, it has a lot of different aspects that it could be worked in. How we could couple these things together is something to explore more broadly. Look. And I think even with the people on Inflation Reduction, Inflation Reduction Act, there's even new programs in that, that's like neighborhood access that really hone in on, again, those smaller pieces for planning or gaining resilient infrastructure at the community level. So we'll keep poking in on that and seeing what we can.
There's also like USDA rural development, but that's one for like strictly rural. With some.
And we just submitted the reconnecting communities grant over moving forward with that process. It's one that I had thought about incorporating future EV infrastructure into the.
Yeah, and I think, that's one of the things that, especially last year's bipartisan infrastructure law, it really did try to, from my vantage point, break down some of those silos between these pieces and start looking at the whole picture. And it's going to be an imperfect process. And again, that grant, a lot of these grants are up for 5-year cycles. And so perfecting that and making sure that we know what's on the table. Yeah, okay. I'll dig in and say a little more of those and see how we can potentially couple things together. Because I think a lot of this gets into resiliency, period. So.
That Cedar Rapids charger that has battery backup on it, they can use that to power their fueling stations if there's a power outage. Pretty interesting.
Questions on the group?
We had not talked at all about niches of the fleets that match up with certain things. So we talked a little bit about heavy vehicles, heavy equipment, and how that may be just still an emerging market, but public safety brings a whole new set of considerations and opportunities as well. So any insights on police or fire or EMS transitions?
Currently, I know that the city of Ames has a hybrid on their side. We've got, the city of Des Moines actually has an all-electric refuse truck on order. Another Des Moines business has a semi on order. There's Cedar Rapids Community School District has partnered with Alliant Energy and their mini school bus. And they're using that for the grid integration as well. Right now, our goal with getting these heavy duty vehicles switched over to electric is to increase that battery range. That's always a concern, especially when you're in a cooler climate. We have to expect about 40%-ish of that energy on cool days to be taken away through your AC or through your heating, through you know how your phone works when it's cold out. Not great, but it still works. It's reaching those thresholds to get. We're at about 200 or between 100 and 250 miles per range right now with light duty. Heavy duty it takes more energy to charge that amount of mileage. We're getting there, and I think that's kind of the purpose for the EPA Clean School Bus program, is to kind of help prop up some of those markets. Tesla's coming out with their semi eventually. You saw that we were looking truck on that slide. That's Tesla. There's a bunch of different retrofitting companies out there, as well as plain EVs for medium duty. So your short distance. And I think once we can transition successfully from, I think medium duty is pretty much there. Once we can increase that mileage, I think we're going to get that heavy there.
To that, so one of the things that has been on C's mind in our office is, that fleet conversion, and so that's funding is likely going to be the next piece of this workshop, and then that fleet is likely to come right behind it. Abbie and I were over in Moline, and it was really nice to see. I believe it was the city of Moline they had law enforcement vehicles, they had public works vehicles, they had the transit buses, they had a wide variety, and not all of them were necessarily EVs, right? Some of them were alternatives, biodiesel and other alternative fuels. So looking at that whole spectrum as well as coupling these things, but that's likely to be one of the very next pieces of this whole pie is, honing right in on fleet and inviting, say, the community school districts and XYZ entities that really need to do that. So, your public works offices and things like that, and have those things out there to the table to start working through that process as well.
I know DART has some electric buses, and then also Cyrides has some, whether or not, however they work.
So as we start to talk about fleet and funding and charging, are you looking at the first 80% or at the last 20%? What's the focus for charging of a vehicle? Because it takes the first 20 equals the first 80 is the same as the last 20.
Yes, it takes a long time.
Right.
When we say like 30 minutes to charge, we're talking 80%.
So you're talking the first 80 then.
For DC fast charger. Feel free to give me my food. more questions, and if you think of anything, my email's on the screen. Talk more, stay connected with grants and different opportunities to show off some electric vehicles. City of Ames had their eco fair over the weekend and had Ford F-150 Lightning there, Rivian truck, all sorts of really cool vehicles, and it's National Drive Electric, pretty much monthly in Iowa, but there's events kind of popping up everywhere. There'll be an electric avenue at our Des Moines, it'll be in Des Moines next March for the All Iowa Auto Show. So I think you should
So we'll keep engaged with Abbie. Actually, we talk all the time at this point. There's so much going on between the federal and our level. So I guess, you know, the discussion so far has been very high level. These are those factors that kind of need to be thought about, you know, and laying that baseline knowledge. Obviously through the survey, we know fleet funding, things like that are the most important pieces for most of the communities in the next step. And so I just want to take the last like 10 minutes or so. If there are certain aspects, if there are certain pieces that you want to see come out or be brought into those conversations, if there's specific pieces of funding you want us to hone in on, we'd love to know, because in a lot of cases, we're trying to, this is a very large topic, we're trying to kind of wrap it all together, and we know that, you know, Clyde might have different needs than the airport and Urbandale and Dart and things like that. So we're trying to hit all the bases, but also push everybody forward at the same time. So obviously grant programs, those smaller, finite, granular grants are on the table. What else is most important for folks to know about, hear about? I know Urbandale's going through a comprehensive planning process. Is this something that you want to know? How can this be better integrated, or just keep that out? Up to you guys.
Everything comes back on the comp plan, of course. We would want
Right,
to integrate
I'm
it
all
into
for
it.
integrating everything into the comp plan. Yeah, and so I guess in a lot of cases, our ordinances, pieces like that, so the retrofitting did not, it came up high on, people are unfamiliar with the topic, but it came up low on, we want to know more information, which I found kind of odd, since as we saw, 80% of the charging is going to be done at home. Is that something that we want to bring into the conversation, or leave that out for each of your individual communities to kind of hash out on your own?
I think it would be nice to have a good base point, you know, and then it's also working with, it's kind of like the Wild West. You have everyone doing everything, and I drive a BEV that's got a CAD mode to it. But when you talk about infrastructural build out, you know, you saw that's just one small piece of it. Tesla's doing their own thing across the way. So what exactly does that look like? And Mid-Am's got their own piece that they're rolling out. So how can we play or fit into the larger network so we aren't duplicating the same thing that Clive's doing at Bond, Durant is doing, that we have a plan instead of just a shotgun approach?
Yeah, one of the things in the survey, you know, we asked about final projects, and people wanted an immediate readiness plan. There was one created in 2016 by actually Abbie's office for the metropolitan area, and it doesn't seem like that's been used very much so far. And so it seems like it might be needed to drill down by community at this point, rather than doing, this is the metro-wide, drill down by community and then accumulate those together to create the regional plan, instead of saying, this is the region, here's your community pieces, kind of do it the other way around. Is that logical? Is that what people have, you know, there's obviously some cities in the room today, some cities of the MPO that aren't. So we can work with the cities that are here, that are at the table already, to really drill in, or, you know, move forward with all the folks you see on the walls around here. We're really kind of, it's up to you how we move forward.
I believe it hooks. Got some communities, like you said, that are ready to go, and others where they have other really important things that they need to focus on instead. So if this is sort of urgency we're feeling because the dollars are there now, and we want to compete and prepare ourselves to really compete 2 or 3 years from now. I think pragmatically, you take the folks that are ready, and see how they best sort of plug into this space. It is also, to your point, everything is emerging so quickly as well that it'd be nice to be able to take the 30,000 foot view of all of this, and even the whole regional view of all of this, but the pace of change, the readiness of partners at various points to move forward, I think it will make it difficult for us to go through a planning process like that, but it's designed to be more comprehensive for all of the member communities or all the geographic region. Seems like an easier to get wins to take the hooker.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way. So our long range transportation plan will again start probably next summer-ish, I would assume. And so that will kind of prime us for those pieces as well. So we can, work with the communities at the table right now and then envelope those into larger pieces. As we move forward. Yeah. Glenn.
I came to learn.
Yeah,
But
did you?
I'll tell you, I'm skeptical.
Okay.
And part of what I would like to understand is the maintenance side of this. The technology is fairly new. A lot of these vehicles are fairly new. We really don't know the long range upkeep, maintenance. You hear the stories about battery replacement for some cars is actually more expensive than the car was originally. I know Dark has 10 electric buses. 7 of them were pulled out of service. They're less than 2 years old because of maintenance issues. 3 of them were running up on some warranty issues currently with the company, so they've also been pulled. All that, in my mind, kind of figures into this equation of when we start talking about fleet changes and understanding, again, law enforcement vehicles. I'm skeptical about making that move when we talk about emergency services. I mean, the lighting equipment that's on the cars, all the computerization that's in those vehicles obviously drains that battery. I understand maybe a detective's vehicle that you're going from the station out interviewing witnesses and things, that makes sense to me. But when we talk about vehicles that are going to be out in emergency service use or snow plows in the middle of winter, some of those, to me, logically, at this point in the technology development, do not make sense. So that brings in that apprehension of when we talk about the fleet piece, are there certain areas that make sense that we can all probably work towards? Yes. And there are some that right now the technology is just not there quite. The dark piece really kind of concerns me. That was a significant amount of money that was spent for those buses. And if we had to pull 7 of them out of service for maintenance issues, and I don't know what the maintenance issues are, that's something, a discussion between the MPO and DART probably should take place, just to figure out what those pieces are. To me, that kind of backs me away from the medium large vehicle discussions until we understand that. Very expensive, and I hate to see us throw money at something that may not be the best use of that funding right away.
Allison, if I am able to jump in, this is Sarah. I just wanted to say through that Climate Mayor's EV Purchasing Collaborative project, we do a lot of fleet analysis for free that can help you plan out that kind of transition plan. And you're absolutely right. In some cases, the medium and heavy duty sector is not there yet, especially if you are transitioning specifically for a total cost of ownership approach and looking for cost savings. There are some cities that we've seen transitioning just because they want to reduce their emissions and they're able to find grants to kind of offset some of those costs. But the fleet analysis that we do, it's a free Excel-based tool. It's called the Dashboard for Rapid Vehicle Electrification. And it has a forecasting tool in there that uses historical market data on how battery prices and vehicle prices have been declining over time, and really helps you kind of plan out that 5, 10, 15-year transition strategy so that we can see, right now the heavy duty dump trucks, for example, aren't good cases for electrification, but 15 years down the road in this forecasting assumption, it looks like they will be. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely let me know. We've worked with a number of public safety fleets specifically that have done that kind of analysis. And there are a couple of different case studies out there and different, sheriffs that we have that would be happy to talk to you about their experience with different EVs and their fleets. But it definitely depends on, the duty cycle and the infrastructure that you have access to and how fast you can recharge them.
Yeah, and I know certain fleets around the US that have brought in EVs for their like emergency management, and police fleets. So I can definitely connect you with someone if you're interested in that, to get the actual officers that drive them, their opinion on it. Or just pretty much anyone, if you're looking for a certain use case, I can find someone.
But it sounds like, Glenn, in a lot of cases, maybe try our own case study on those less vital pieces. Parks and Rec, have me incorporate Parks and Rec vehicles, see how the Parks and Rec vehicles go with it. Okay, now say community development comes in, or with those lower hanging organizations, rather than go in like, hey, emergency services, you're gonna be our guinea pig. So I think that's perfectly fine. We can kind of start looking at case studies and looking at how to do those types of pieces. Because like they said, the smaller vehicle fleets are further because passenger vehicles are in that same kind of boat and things like that. So we can pull with that. Okay. Any other wants, dreams, hopes, needs?
Well, we're gonna do, at least for my council, the biggest question is the life cycle costs of these vehicles advantageous to the taxpayers versus a traditional internal combustion vehicle? So we've got a lot of financial forecasting tools that allow us to do some of that. However, the piece that I would love to be able to incorporate would be not just an assumption around kilowatt hours purchased from utility, but kilowatt hours also generated by the city. Because we want the cheapest kilowatt hour price we can get if we're gonna have an electric vehicle fleet. And I know dispersed generation is not where our utilities partners are at. They help us out in many other ways, but as public entities, we've got so many prime areas where we can deploy that on existing buildings or existing public land. And so incorporating that into the analysis would be very valuable to my city. So we can
Yeah, just a quick note, the drive analysis tool that we have, you can build in a couple of different types of charging costs. One of them being utility purchased electricity, one of them being public charging, and one of them being on route. So you can assign different price levels for those different kilowatt costs, and you can assign different scenarios. You can add multiple costs in there. Not sure if that's helpful.
Is there a tutorial for that online, Sarah, for folks who are considering looking at Drive?
I don't believe we have a video tutorial online. There is a user guide. Steph dropped the link to that, and we'll follow up with a Word doc of all of these links because I know we dropped a lot in there. But I am also happy if anyone wants to schedule a call to do a run through of the tool. Steph and I do them very frequently for fleets to show you how to do an analysis in the tool, but also if you want us to run the analysis first and then walk you through the results, we're happy to do that.
I also have a fleet, which is different but similar. There's just a bunch of different types of tools out there.
There really are, and I think that's one of the things that's inundating people is there's so many tools. There's so many, even for Justice 40, there's 20 different types of maps you can look at and see what it is a pitch. And so what does that mean to us? What does that mean to this? And so there's a ton of stuff flying around. We're trying to sift it as best as possible. So some of the things that we created the EV webpage on our website to kind of bring some of these pieces just into one location. So the NEVI plan is there, the weatherization or the case study with winter weather, in Des Moines is on there. The policy toolkit the ladies were talking about earlier from Electrification Coalition is on there. Some of these bare basics, but as these things continue to come up, those will all be kind of added on there. Please bear with me. I am not a website developer. It is not the most pretty place you've ever been, but we do have someone who is going to be helping us soon, kind of bring that together, because at this point I am your website developer. So, but if there's something that you're seeing that you, or that you need that you're not seeing there, let me know and we'll get it up there. While we were sitting here, I added a number of the different mapping portals, so I don't remember, there's a whole EV Go, and all those are now on that webpage, so you can click in. And eventually it will look prettier, but for right now, because there's so many fine pieces, they're being tossed up there in as much of an orderly fashion as I possibly can. But that's something I think, maybe there's all sorts of analysis tools out there. Maybe we have one of the workshops specifically on training city staff to use some of these tools, whether it be Drive. There's a number of them for a lot of the bipartisan pieces and the inflation. I'm not IRA. Yeah, good.
Two things. One, on the fleet analysis, maybe it'd be neat if we could do almost show an example. One of us maybe something simple. Here's what the analysis looks like, something that's then kind of tangible for all of us. Then when you're working on Pete's wonderful question there, that some of the incentives are tax credit based, which don't necessarily work for us, but maybe if there's some examples or ways to capture that, or maybe just through a lease purchase or something that we've all maybe done before, but examples on how to maybe grab some of that with it.
Yeah, with the Inflation Reduction Act, it actually changed the way that tax credit worked, because before public entities couldn't get it. Now the dealer that you buy from can claim it on your behalf and then pay that money off. What they charge you or give it back to you.
Anything else, Bon Rant? Anything specific for you guys? Absorbing? Let's take in. Luke, you're being quiet. Anything specific for you?
Good.
Cool.
Good job.
So we will never be the end all be all, everything for everyone. But one, we are working in this area. We've made contacts with Electrification Coalition, Abbie, a number of other entities. If there's something that comes up that you're not finding, let us know, put it on our radar so that if we can continue to bring it into the fold. I've taken tons of notes about the next steps, and we'll try to work on those and let you know as soon as possible when those next workshops are, and what those will be entailed. And it's likely that you're going to continue to kind of get a survey and a pulse, so we can keep a pulse on what's next for you guys. Where are we going here? So have we covered this enough? And so I'm sorry, I know we are all surveyed out after 2020, 2021, but it is going to help us internally keep that ball moving, make sure that we're headed down the right track and that we're not just doing what we want to do. We're actually providing that value to people. So with that, thank you. Thank you to Sarah and Steph online. Thank you to Abbie. And thank you to all of you participating in the survey, coming today. And then obviously your feedback is very helpful and we appreciate it. Parking tickets or parking validation are right up here on the table. There's also some Halloween candy because now it's October. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.